Now, Global Aid Development Group Oxfam says some governments are turning a blind eye to illicit outflows. Sipho Mthathi is Oxfam's Executive Director in South Africa. She joins me now. Sipho, thanks for coming in. Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
So it's been said that Africa is losing billions through these illicit flows. You're looking at mispricing, trade mispricing, criminal networks, drug trafficking. But the question often comes up, how do we know that something like 50 billion is the correct figure when we don't really have a measure of what's leaving the continent?
Yeah, I mean, this issue of measuring the actual amount that Africa loses is obviously complex. And we know for a fact that actually the $50 billion a year is a very conservative estimate. There are studies that have been done that actually put the number as high as 1.8 trillion US dollars a year. And one of the things that we are saying is crucial with the Mbeki report is that it's basically consolidated all of the research that's been done and developed a methodology that gives us a closer to kind of starting point picture, because we wouldn't call it an accurate picture. It's clear that we need to study the issue further and understand even the other ways in which money is leaking out of the continent. But the bottom line is this is an opportunity, I mean, for African governments who are losing the most to these illicit flows at a critical time in the continent when Africa needs to be able to stand on its feet, to develop infrastructure that would enable African economies to develop further, create desperately needed jobs, provide desperately needed, services, education that would bring dignity back to the majority of Africa's, 40% that lives in extreme poverty and starves. And so we are really commend the African Union for adopting this report. We are encouraging the AU to move very swiftly to make sure that there's a collective mechanism that helps countries develop the capacity to strengthen their own tax regulatory regimes. But there has to be a global, effort, because we understand that this is a global problem.
You've just come back from Davos. You've released the much publicized report on inequality. And I suppose they're very much linked. I mean, these funds could be used to counter the inequality we're seeing on the continent. So there is a link.
There's definitely a link. I mean, this is at the heart of it for us, that money that governments need to build infrastructure, to create jobs, lift people out of extreme poverty, is actually money that's going into the pockets of investors who are already part of the 1% who own half of the world's wealth. And so for us, this is really critical because, and we feel strongly that this is an opportunity for Africa to balance, the power scale and to really assert itself in the global stage, to say we cannot remain as a continent that is dependent on aid. And this is the really interesting dimension. There's actually more money that leaves the continent in illicit capital flows than there is money coming into the continent in development aid. At this day and age, for such a resource-wealthy continent, Africa should not need aid.
But why do we not take the next step and actually look at those commercial outfits that are doing this? There's no naming and shaming. It just seems that this is a topic that's been brought upon years ago. The step that's required to start intervening just doesn't seem to come by. Why is that?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is really about, lack of political will, and that's why we are actually calling for a World Tech Summit to take place in July, ahead of the Sustainable Development Summit of the United Nations in September, because we feel that there has to be, a collective effort that is led at the global level, where governments come together and say, let's look at what is a fairer tax regime for the world that enables that there's less of these leakages, but that we can still do business. It's possible. What it will take is political will. And I think that for Africa and for African governments, if Africa misses this opportunity to say, this is what we want, because this is integrally linked to Africa's own vision. I mean, Africa has developed a vision 2063, which places development, inclusive growth, addressing infrastructure challenges, on the table. You cannot have a vision like that and not address the one opportunity to claw back resources that would enable us to move further in addressing these development challenges.
All right, so you've got the budget speech coming up, being delivered by Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene. He delivers that later this month. As Oxfam, what could he do to curb this inequality or to lessen that inequality? It's at a time where many are saying South Africa is actually losing out in terms of money, running out of money on their coffers here. What would you like to hear from the Finance Minister?
Yeah. I mean, we would certainly, like to hear, obviously, the usual about how much money is being invested in education, but also, I mean, how much money is going to be, reclaimed from these companies. I mean, the story of how at a time that, there was a crisis, in Lonmin was able to shift more than 250 million South African rands through transfer pricing. And so we feel strongly that one of the things that the minister could announce is the establishment of a mechanism that would strengthen South Africa's ability to trace these legal activities and to claw back resources such that we can double, the allocation to development and social services next year.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Sipho Mthathi, Oxfam's Executive Director in South Africa, thanks very much for your time.